Hello, I'm Ellen Bentz coming today from Wheaton, Illinois in the USA. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson, coming today from Chelmsford in the UK. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our hearts to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and go behind the headlines of a critical happening in our world that needs our attention right now.
In today's episode, we take one of these regular deep dives, although it might not be so regular, to more fully understand and tune in with something many of us may know only a little about, and see where we might hone in with our prayers and intentions. And as we record, it's June 24th, 2025.
So we thought we'd try something very different this week, taking a detour from our normal playbook of staying objective and not offering opinion, which isn't always easy, I have to admit.
Yes.
Rather, we thought we would be ready to express our own opinions, kind of editorial style, if of course, while remembering that we don't know everything about the context, nor have access to undisputed psychological profiles of the people we talk about. And the theme that's stirring us, indeed has been for some time, is the way that some prominent men in the world use religion to justify their political ideologies, power, and in some cases, wars. As always, see what resonates with you. We'll come back later, as always, to see where we might focus our attentions and prayers.
So, in what ways do political leaders and tyrants use religion to justify their ideologies and control of people, and maybe warp religion? I think that's what we're talking about, where the tyrants, they stretch things and they're just not true.
Yeah.
And that's where our little editorial pieces will come in, I think. So many tyrants throughout history have used religion to justify their ideologies and maintain control over populations. And this practice is well documented across different cultures and time periods. Indeed, the phenomenon of exploiting religion for power is probably as old as organized religion itself. And even organized religion was made by men and used these ideologies. And sadly, remains very much alive in today's political world. Tyrants have often adopted sacred or divine language, presenting themselves as chosen by God or as having a special relationship with the divine. Many are affected by hubris, an excessive pride or arrogance in which a person believes they are special and above ordinary rules, while some surround themselves with religious leaders who help to legitimize their rule and suppress dissent by framing opposition as ungodly or heretical. An obvious example here are the historical figures Constantine the Great and Philip II of Spain, who used religion to unify their subjects and justify their authority in some cases, establishing institutions like the Inquisition to enforce orthodoxy and loyalty.
Some rulers deliberately divide populations along religious or sectarian lines to weaken potential opposition. By creating or exacerbating religious differences, these men have ensured that groups focus on internal conflicts rather than challenging the regime. This tactic was notably employed by colonial powers as well as by modern dictators. So the Spanish again, but pretty well all of the European colonial powers use religion in their so-called mission. In the 20th and 21st centuries, dictators have continued to use religion for control. For instance, Francisco Macias Nguema of Equatorial Guinea used the Catholic Church to legitimize his rule, even replacing religious imagery with his own and having priests proclaim him as a divine figure. In Yugoslavia in the early 1990s, Slobodan Milosevic manipulated religious and ethnic identities to consolidate power and incite conflict. And more recently, Bashar al-Assad in Syria institutionalized control over religious discourse, using it to shape public opinion and maintain his grip on power. This included creating the Ministry of Religious Endowments and appointing loyalists to oversee religious institutions. Adopting what is a common approach among tyrants, He used state power to shape what is acceptable religious behavior, enforce a political religious discourse, and promote a religious identity that aligned with his political authority. This allowed him to marginalize dissent and legitimize his rule.
Of course, the use of religion by political leaders to justify power and control isn't new. The practice has deep historical roots and has been a common strategy across different cultures and eras for manipulating others and suppressing dissent, as we said. Other examples to those we've mentioned include the manipulation of Christianity during the Crusades and colonization, the use of religious rhetoric by European and American ruling classes to justify slavery, and the co option of Islamic authority in various empires and modern states. But the manipulation, or what might be called weaponization of religion, isn't limited to Christianity or Islam. It's a universal tool for tyrants seeking to consolidate power.
It's incredible, isn't it, when we think about the scale to which religion has been used through history in so many empires and major world powers. And as we'll see, very much today, it's just extraordinary how influential it has been,
Right.
and in a very destructive way for many people.
And so counterintuitive and counterproductive to what the religion actually says
Yes.
and intends.
So what examples might we point to today of such abuse? And again, these are pretty selective. And some listener caution here, as we said earlier, this may especially be the part where we offer some of our own opinions. We will see. Let's look at some contemporary examples then of how political leaders and regimes persist in using religion to justify their own ideologies and wars. In the Arab world, many regimes rely on religion to bolster their legitimacy. Saudi Arabia's monarchy is closely tied to Wahhabi Islam, using religious authorities to justify its rule and policies. Iran's government is explicitly theocratic, with religious leaders like the supreme leader wielding ultimate political authority, and religious doctrine being used to justify both domestic control and foreign interventions. In Afghanistan, the Taliban continues to enforce its particular interpretation of Sunni Islam, including its strict adherence to Sharia or Islamic law. And in Myanmar, the military has used Buddhist nationalism as a tool to justify persecution of the Rohingya Muslim minority. Political leaders and military figures have framed their actions as protecting Buddhism, thereby mobilizing public support and legitimizing state violence.
In India, the ruling BJP party is increasingly using Hindu nationalist ideology to justify policies and actions against religious minorities, particularly Muslims. The government often employs religious symbolism and rhetoric to consolidate support and marginalize opposition. Religion is also a significant factor in the narratives and justifications used by both Israel and its adversaries, such as Hezbollah and Hamas. But its role as a tool, especially in official Israeli policy, varies depending upon the context and audience. The state's foundation is rooted in the Zionist movement, which was largely secular in origin and sought to establish a homeland for Jews as a solution to anti-Semitism in Europe. However, religious narratives are present among some segments of Israeli society, particularly among religious Zionists. These groups viewed the establishment and expansion of Israel as a religious duty, citing biblical promises to the Jewish people. Their perspective is especially influential among settlers in the West Bank, who justify their presence through their interpretations of Judaism.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has increasingly used religious rhetoric to justify the continued war with Hamas, repeatedly citing the biblical story of the Amalekites, a tribe commanded by God to be annihilated in his framing of Israel's military actions against Hamas. In speeches, he has told soldiers and the public to remember what Amalek has done to you, directly quoting the Hebrew Bible to justify aggressive military responses and frame the conflict as a battle of good versus evil. He has also quoted other passages from the Torah and the Book of Psalms, such as, "You have girded me with strength for the battle," and referenced Ecclesiastes to argue there is a time for peace and a time for war, suggesting that the current period is divinely sanctioned for conflict. This is despite his rhetoric being contrary to the teaching of many Jewish scholars, who argue that the Amalekite story should be interpreted metaphorically, not as a literal mandate for violence, and warn against its use for political reasons.
For their part, the Shia Islamist group Hezbollah also uses religious identity and rhetoric as a mobilizing tool, framing its ideology as a resistance movement against foreign power and in opposition to Israel's existence, often invoking religious language and symbolism. However, many scholars argue that Hezbollah's primary motivations are not religious, but geopolitical. Big surprise. With religion serving as a means to justify intervention and rally support rather than being the root cause of conflict. Hezbollah's anti-Israel rhetoric has often called for the elimination of Israel, which they seek to justify as a religious duty, a defensive jihad. Hamas, a Sunni Islamist group, also explicitly frames its struggle against Israel as a religious duty or jihad, and views the conquest of Israel as a religious objective. Religion is central to its identity and used as justification for armed resistance.
It seems that a lot of these groups use, or indeed governments use religion when it's convenient, don't they?
When it's convenient.
And they feel this is going to win over public support, and they suddenly become, what's the word? Guardians of the faith.
Mm-hmm. Guardians of the faith.
Guardians of
they
the
think
faith.
that, yes.
Yeah.
But the problem is they manipulate it and they tweak it to suit what they are doing. And they don't, or they take it out of context.
Exactly.
Don't tell the whole story.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, and sometimes we don't even have the correct rooted translation.
No.
The translations themselves have been manipulated. And let's be honest, you can find everything in the Bible. Murder, rape, you can find it all. I think it was Shakespeare who said even the devil can quote scripture.
Yes, exactly.
So you can find whatever you want and make it what you want in there if you don't have a pure heart.
Exactly. Another of Israel's main adversaries, and of course very much in the news at the moment, Iran, has also consistently used religious rhetoric and Islamic doctrine to justify its policies towards Israel. The current regime frames its opposition to Israel not merely as a political dispute, but as a religious and moral obligation rooted in Islamic teachings and the concept of defending the global Muslim community. Beginning with Ayatollah Khomeini, Iranian leaders have characterized support for the Palestinian cause and opposition to Israel as an Islamic duty for all Muslims, citing Quranic verses to argue that Muslims are commanded to prepare for conflict against perceived enemies, specifically referencing the occupation of Palestine as a violation of Islamic sanctity. Iran's leaders have frequently justified support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah as part of a sacred struggle against oppression and injustice, promising religious rewards for those who participate and providing political, financial, and military support to such groups. Some reformist voices in Iran do advocate for a more pragmatic or nationalistic approach, but these are generally marginalized in official discourse.
In addition to the polarized positions being taken by Israel and its adversaries, Christian Zionism and the interests of American Jews have played a significant and enduring role in shaping the policy of Israel's most important ally, the United States. Many American Christians, particularly evangelicals, believe that the establishment and support of Israel fulfills biblical prophecy and are part of God's plan. This belief has translated into a powerful lobbying force in Washington, influencing both public opinion and policymakers. Similarly, the organized American Jewish community has consistently advocated for Israel with both religious and cultural motivations. The Holocaust and the desire for Jewish self-determination have reinforced this support. Of course, we can understand that. Few U.S. politicians of any party have been ready to challenge these views. Instead, U.S. leaders have often invoked religious language when discussing the U.S.-Israel relationship, even if official policy is justified through a mix of strategic and moral arguments.
It's confusion, isn't it? It's confusion.
Yeah.
The role and policies and, let's call them, rights of the current government of the State of Israel versus the understanding of what the people of Israel are, the children of Israel.
Well, and if we go deeper and we look into Germany and, Hitler demonizing the Jews and what caused all of this, you just can keep going back and back and back and finding it through history.
Of course. I guess from our point of view, and again, this is a view that many in the Arab world wouldn't hold. The 1947, 1948, whenever it was, establishment of the State of Israel as providing a homeland for those dispossessed Jews was a wonderful event. Religion also plays a significant, though not exclusive, role in the justification for Russia's war against Ukraine. The Russian government, closely aligned with the Russian Orthodox Church, has increasingly relied upon religious narratives to legitimize its actions, both domestically and internationally. The concept of Ruski Mir, that's Russian world, is central to its justification. This proposes a mystical unity of all Russian speakers in history, language, and faith, framing Russia as the standard bearer of Orthodox Christian civilization. This ideology is used to justify Russian dominance over Ukraine and other regions, often portraying the war as a defense of Orthodox Christianity and traditional values against Western secularism. Russian leaders, including Vladimir Putin, have framed Kyiv as a sacred space for Orthodox Christianity. I think there's a very important church or cathedral in Kyiv that was very much regarded as a central jewel, shall we call it, in the crown of Orthodox Christianity, and reference the baptism of Prince Vladimir in Crimea as a historical and spiritual milestone for both Russia and Ukraine. This narrative is used to assert a religious and cultural claim over Ukrainian lands. The Russian Orthodox Church has become an arm of state policy under Vladimir Putin, with Patriarch Kirill and other high-ranking clergy actively supporting the war and providing theological justifications. Prayers for military victory have been mandated, and dissent within the Church has been punished. Both the Church and Russian state have promoted the idea that the war is a holy struggle between good and evil, with Russia defending Orthodox believers from persecution and Western influence. As part of a broader information operation aimed at shaping global opinion, the Kremlin has also accused Ukraine of religious intolerance and of oppressing Orthodox believers. Yet, in occupied territories, Russia reportedly systematically violates religious freedom, targeting non-Russian Orthodox religious groups and using religion as a tool of control and coercion. So these examples demonstrate that across different regions and political systems, religion sadly remains a tool that is very much alive for justifying ideologies, controlling populations, and even rationalizing wars.
I did not realize that it was being used so strongly in Russia and against the Ukraine. I hadn't heard that narrative in the U.S. is not portraying that.
I mean, certainly the Church is known has sided with Putin for really since the outset. Whether under duress or not, I don't know. And I know that those who write about Putin, who seemingly know him, his biographers and so on, have often spoken about this grand vision he has for reuniting the religious heartland. And certainly sacred sites in Kyiv and Ukraine are regarded as traditionally Russian in his eyes, in his narrative. And indeed, at some points in history have been. It's quite complicated.
It is. So how are religious narratives being twisted? Let's look at a few examples. Without getting too much into theological arguments, which we're certainly not well qualified to do, we thought we should take a look at a couple of examples of where religious scholars say political leaders are abusing or, at best, misinterpreting what their faith tradition teaches. Among the most severe cases of such misinterpretation is the Taliban's representation of Islam, which some clerics say amounts to gross misinterpretation, and where even traditionally conservative countries like Saudi Arabia have criticized the Taliban's interpretation of Islamic Sharia law. They argue that the Taliban's actions, such as imposing strict dress codes, restricting women's rights, and banning music, are based on an extremist interpretation of Islam, and point out that the Taliban's justifications for restricting women's voices and movements are not supported by the Quran or Sunnah, and that is the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and practices.
On the contrary, Quranic verses and hadiths demonstrate that women's voices were heard and respected during the Prophet Muhammad's time. Indeed, his main sponsor, I believe, was his wife. Islam also respects a principle of no compulsion in religion, indicating that forcing someone to practice Islam or follow a specific interpretation goes against fundamental Islamic tenets. Those who argue that the Taliban does act in alignment with their particular understanding of Islam claim that their strict interpretation of Sharia is based on the Deobandi strand of Sunni Islam, a revivalist movement that began in the 19th century, and also actually, surprisingly, has Sufi influences and was partly a response to Westernization and the Christian mission in Afghanistan during the period of British colonial rule. Taking Iran as another example where a strict religious code is applied, clerics there frequently justify the call for Israel's eradication on the belief that Israel is occupying Islamic land, in other words, the territory of historic Palestine, which they believe belongs to Muslims. This view is framed as a religious obligation for Muslims to resist and ultimately remove what is perceived as a foreign colonial entity from lands regarded as sacred in Islam. The language used by Iranian leaders often invokes theological motifs, such as Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei describing Israel as a cancerous tumor. However, such terms aren't derived from the Quran. The regime's narrative also uses the idea of resisting the oppressor, a legitimate theme in Islam, but in the Iranian context, it is exclusively applied to Israel. They also frame the struggle against Israel as a cosmic battle between good and evil, with Israel cast as an agent of global arrogance and a satanic force. My goodness, when we've wondered, haven't we, about how to handle what's going on at the moment between Iran and Israel, and at times whether an emergency episode was needed. It's become such a rapidly changing situation that at times it becomes very difficult. And those who follow the Facebook group will know that we have been putting various things there, and an occasional virtual prayer times you can join as well. It's a very, very difficult one to know where this is going at the moment. But this framing, given the perhaps existential threat that the current Israeli regime might be feeling, that they potentially are at risk of being toppled, if they are really sincere in this belief, it's quite awesome, isn't it, if this conflict escalates, using language like this, satanic force, battle of good and evil, and Israel, of course, having a very similar view as well, and seeking to protect its own right to survive.
Right.
Very, very dangerous times.
Outside of Iran, many Islamic commentators argue for peace treaties with Israel, saying that the Quran does not mandate the eradication of Israel or the Jewish people, but instead contains verses that call for justice and respectful treatment of the people of the book, including Jews and Christians. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. Well,
there you go.
In the Quran, absolutely. People of the book.
Let's make these people the leaders.
They should be the most tolerant of the Abrahamic faiths, really.
Yes. And reminding our listeners that they're all Abrahamic, religions that have a lot in common. Several Muslim majority countries, including Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE, have normalized or have diplomatic relations with Israel, with their religious authorities providing Islamic justifications for these moves. For instance, the UAE's Fatwa Council cite the principle of muslaha, public interest, and historical Islamic precedents, such as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, to argue that peace agreements are permissible and even desirable when they serve the greater good.
Mm.
And wisdom prevails, right?
Yep.
As for the current Israeli prime minister's occasional use of religious rhetoric to justify his actions and policies, many Jewish scholars argue that Netanyahu has weaponized Jewish identity and history, particularly the Holocaust and the legacy of persecution, to deflect criticism of his government's policies and to silence political opponents. They argue that his approach conflates legitimate criticism of Israeli policy with anti-Semitism, undermining genuine efforts to combat real anti-Semitism. He is seen by some as wanting to reshape Judaism into an exclusionary, nationalist ideology that prioritizes Jewish supremacy and territorial expansion over universal Jewish values, such as equality, justice, and pluralism. The passage of the Jewish nation-state law, which codified Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people and omitted guarantees of equal rights for Arabs, is cited as evidence of this shift. Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox leaders, such as the Haredi, have also criticized him for what they see as his misuse of religious rhetoric and for making statements deemed heretical or disrespectful to Jewish theological tradition. For example, his comments questioning divine protection during the Holocaust were condemned by Haredi politicians as hearsay and as reflecting a secular nationalist distortion of Judaism.
Mm. Yeah, again, it's this conflation of anti-Semitism and criticizing current Israel government policy, isn't it? The two coming together in people's minds. It's a mess. It really is.
It is, and it's the people who, as in here, the scholars, the religious leaders who come forward to say, no, that's not what this is about, are so often shut down.
Yes, they're not really being heard, are they? No.
Right.
So what about the use of religion in secular societies? Even in ostensibly secular societies that have not traditionally been led by oppressors, religion has at times been used to shape or justify political ideologies, and is often used by leaders to galvanize support, divide opposition, and maintain control. With this in mind, we've been talking about countries in the Middle East and the Taliban and so on. We thought we should take a quick look at how religion has been used by political bigwigs in our own countries. Certainly, an idea that the United States is a people specially protected or favored by God, sometimes called the chosen nation or exceptional nation doctrine, has been invoked by many US presidents to justify policy, particularly in foreign affairs. George Washington's addition of "So help me God" to the presidential oath set a precedent for linking national purpose with divine favor. I guess God Bless America came in around that time as well, did it? Was it?
Probably.
Yeah, probably. With the nation's founders often describing it as having a providential role in history, although generally avoiding explicit claims of being a chosen people in the biblical sense. Abraham Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address used biblical metaphors and quasi-religious language, portraying the Civil War as a test of whether a nation— I used to be able to say this in American. I'm not going to try it now. I did some voice training with a wonderful lady who teaches actors, and Gettysburg was actually the speech we used.
Oh.
Conceived in liberty, something like that. Dedicated. Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I can't get it out of my mind. I used to know it off by heart. I can't do it now. But that idea in the Gettysburg Address, that would actually long endure. It's a beautiful speech, that aside, of course. Woodrow Wilson saw America's role in World War I as being a moral mission rooted in Christian ideals and the belief that the US had a duty to lead the world towards peace and democracy. Similarly, Truman described the Cold War as a moral struggle between good and evil. We grew up in that period, didn't we? Actually, I remember really seeing the Russians and the communists as, definitely the enemy, seeking to unite the world's religions in a spiritual crusade against communism. He believed America's leadership was divinely inspired and necessary to defend freedom. Jimmy Carter publicly described his Christian faith as a foundation for his decisions, while George W. Bush described the US as having a calling or mission from the maker of heaven, at times invoking the idea that America was chosen by God to expand freedom in the world. And other presidents, including Reagan, Eisenhower, and Obama, have also invoked religious language to varying degrees.
President Trump has aligned himself with conservative Christian values to secure evangelical support, while Joe Biden, a Roman Catholic, used religious language to justify policies on issues such as immigration, poverty, and social justice. Other prominent U.S. politicians have similarly justified their views on the basis of religion. Even in the week we are recording, Senator Ted Cruz told Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson, he cited a Bible verse saying that those who bless Israel will be blessed, to explain why he believed the United States should support Israel, conflating the modern state of Israel with the people of the Bible who were children or followers of God. That was quite a ruckus.
Yeah. In the UK, at least for most of the past century, religion has been much less used for political reasons, even if God Save Our Gracious King is the first line of the UK's national anthem. Even prime ministers with personal faith, like Harold Macmillan, Tony Blair, and John Major, rarely spoke openly about it while they were in office. Blair was famously counseled by his advisor Alistair Campbell, "We don't do God." This is far removed from the 19th century statesman William Gladstone, who saw political service as a divine mission and argued that the church should have a close relationship with the state, and also from the approach of Stanley Baldwin, who was Prime Minister in the interwar period, who often invoked Almighty God in his speeches and used religious language to support his arguments. Worryingly, though, the current use of far-right rhetoric is seeing religion being weaponized in anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim narratives, though mainstream politicians have largely, so far, avoided using such overtly divisive language.
Part of the interesting issue here is, the UK, Germany, you have state religion. You don't have separation of church and state like we have in the US. And so what Trump is doing, and here I will get editorial, what he is doing with the evangelical Christians who make up most of the MAGA movement, it's so controversial here because it's not supposed to be happening. That's that's illegal.
Yeah. It's a very interesting debate. I mean, it is widely thought that the king wants to be defender of the faiths, plural, not the faith. And there's quite a debate about whether the Church of England should be disestablished. Is that the right word? No longer become the state religion. But I think it's unlikely to happen. It seems to serve a purpose in maintaining some sort of order, even if it's not in line really with totally equal society.
Mm-hmm. People just see it really as a different section of Christianity, maybe, and not really as a state church, or is it really thought of as a state church?
I think that would depend who you speak to. It certainly still has influence and power.
Okay.
For example, a number of members of the House of Lords are senior members of the Church of England.
Oh, right.
And when it comes to national events, ceremonies, and so on, it would be the Church of England that is the host primarily. Although, for example, the coronation, there was, I didn't watch the entire coronation, I have to confess, but I seem to remember that there were representatives from different faiths present and food in that service. So, but officially, yes, it's the Church of England. But absolutely, I think most people will, if they're asked what their religion is and they don't have one, but they consider themselves to be vaguely Christian, then probably they'll default to Church of England denomination. But those who are in the church who are Christian will respect and recognize the different denominations and varieties, as it were. So coming back to our main focus on tyrants and exploiters of religion for their actions and words, what are the consequences of such abuse of power? When powerful leaders and tyrants use religion to justify their actions and maintain control, several significant consequences often follow. Most obviously, there's invariably a suppression of individual freedoms, including freedom of speech, the right of assembly, and belief. Religious minorities and dissenters frequently face persecution, and laws may be enacted that curtail democratic rights, especially for women and marginalized groups. The fusion of religion and politics tends to deepen social divisions, creating in-group, out-group dynamics, and increasing polarization between religious and non-religious communities, or indeed between different sects within the same religion. This can fuel sectarian violence, as we saw in Northern Ireland, for example, and undermine national unity. We covered this aspect in our recent episode on polarization and the global authenticity crisis, as regular listeners will recall. When religious leaders or institutions are co-opted by political power, their credibility and spiritual authority may be weakened. Followers often perceive these leaders as serving the state rather than their faith, being corrupted or coerced into doing the state's bidding rather than defending the true faith.
By framing their rule as divinely sanctioned, tyrants may also justify authoritarian measures, making it harder for citizens to question or challenge their authority. This can entrench autocratic regimes and block democratic reforms, often resulting in laws that prioritize the interest of the ruling elite or dominant religious group at the expense of pluralism and fair governance. Disturbingly, the justification of state actions through religion can lead to widespread human rights abuses, including discrimination, imprisonment, torture, and even genocide against those who are seen as threats to the established religious political order. And we've certainly seen this throughout history. Such uses of religion by tyrants and powerful leaders to justify control and policy often have far-reaching negative effects on society, not least the erosion of freedoms and entrenchment of authoritarianism. It's also being used by some right-wing politicians as a part of their anti-immigrant rhetoric. For example, several prominent Polish politicians have made statements opposing the admission of Muslim migrants into Poland. These include Dominik Tarczyński, a member of the European Parliament, and former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. Tarczyński went as far to say that not even one Muslim will come to Poland. That's a quote. And said that he believes most terrorists are Muslim. He claims his concern is about the safety and preservation of Poland's homogeneous Christian society, rather than religion or race, although his comments have been widely seen as being anti-Muslim. Of course. Yeah.
We are beginning to hear those kind of statements, aren't we, from certain politicians more frequently, and very chilling that they are. So, is it solely or primarily men and the patriarchy that exploits religion for gaining and sustaining the power? I think we know the answer to that one, do we? The use of religion to justify political power and control has, of course, historically been dominated by men and the patriarchy, but is actually not exclusively restricted to them. One reason for this is that most major religious traditions have historically limited top leadership roles to men, reflecting broader patriarchal structures in society. This has allowed male political leaders to more easily co-opt religious authority and narratives to legitimize their rule. Patriarchal values embedded in religious doctrine have often also reinforced the idea, among some at least, that men are better suited for leadership, both spiritually and politically. We see that in the Christian faith, don't we? This belief is reflected in the underrepresentation of women in the highest religious and political offices, and in the persistence of traditional gender roles. There are some exceptions to where women are underrepresented in top religious and political positions, such as among the Druze and some Hindu sects, but historically these are few and far between. And what's more, research consistently identifies several psychological, social, and motivational factors that help explain why, on average, men tend to express a greater desire for power than women. We touched on this on our episode on narcissism as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That is the desire to influence, control, or impact others and to control resources. This may be in part due to the traditional gender roles of many societies that have encouraged men to be assertive, dominant, and competitive, but also due to social power structures historically favoring men and so granting them greater access to resources and opportunities. Nature too may play a part. The bullish, sometimes aggressive, and self-serving drive of some men playing a part here.
And I can't help but think of the Taliban here and the women who were doctors and
Yes.
teachers and held high business positions who have now been forced to stay home, and we know, to wear what they have to wear and not talk to anyone except for their relatives. Just horrible.
Yes.
And I often think, where are their fathers? Where are their brothers? Where are their sons speaking out and fighting against the Taliban? I know it's more complicated than just that, but in other instances where things like this have happened, the voices get small and scared, and we can't let that happen in today's world.
No. So where might we hone in with our intention and prayers? So this is the point you might wish to bookmark to come back to. And as always, we'll put the bookmark for this point in the show notes. Let's just take a moment to center, allow yourself to really let go of other thoughts best you can. Take a moment to catch your breath, let go, and connect with the intentions we offer here, allowing them to resonate for you and to perhaps put in your own words, express in your own way as we suggest a few themes for intention and prayer. We will, for there will be a readiness, bravery, and perseverance of religious leaders whose state power brokers seek to co-opt to remain faithful to their faith.
We ask that there will be a readiness of such religious leaders to call out and correct statements made by political leaders and parties in the name of religion that are contrary to the principles and teachings of their faith.
We will for an increasing breakdown of patriarchal structures and belief systems that favor male dominance in political, religious, military, and other controlling structures.
We will for a readiness of trusted advisors who have the ear of incumbent tyrants and power brokers who use religion to justify their manipulation and abuse to diplomatically guide them toward alternative narratives that don't undermine individual freedoms or distort public understanding of religious teachings.
We pray for a readiness of world leaders and institutions such as NATO and the United Nations to call out and sanction those who justify war on the basis of the perceived religious rights of their nation or people.
We will that politicians will not be persuaded to appeal to what they perceive as popular appeal, to use religious arguments to justify policies opposing immigration on the basis of an individual's ethnicity or religious backgrounds.
And we ask for a move among those who have influence within the administration of Donald Trump and within the Democrat Party leadership in the United States to challenge the belief and strong lobby of many American evangelical Christians that support for Israel fulfills a biblical prophecy and is part of God's plan.
So this week, as we consider the abuse and exploitation of religion to justify personal power and political ideology, we suggest holding as our main intention, we will that there will be a movement of compassion, realism, and integrity in the hearts and minds of those who might justify war on the basis of their perceived religious rights of their nation or people. Please join us in holding this.
That about wraps it up for this episode. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in my daily insight timer offerings, and with Ellen in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out too for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us in holding intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. In the meantime, thank you, go well, stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Binns and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.